All right. Welcome back to the All Sorts podcast, everybody. Today we're going on another one of our, deep dives, this time into some fascinating material. Actually, you, the listeners, have brought us some really intriguing stuff about, well, basically the story of Louis Pasteur and his germ theory.
Ah, Pasteur.
Exactly. And specifically how his ideas, well, kind of made their way into British medicine during the 19th century. It wasn't exactly a smooth journey, as we'll see. But the real topic we're going to grapple with here is how did this truly radical idea coming all the way from France shake up, well, really shake up, the deeply rooted medical beliefs in Britain? And what were the consequences?
Huge question, yeah. It really is a pivotal period we're talking about here. And as some of the sources you sent in point out, the 18th and 19th centuries were, well, they were a time of immense scientific upheaval, right? We're talking about long-held beliefs about the natural world being, completely upended. And this revolution in thinking extended directly to how people thought about disease.
It's almost impossible to overstate how important that change in perspective was.
Absolutely. And one of the key drivers of that change, one that your sources highlight, was the rapid advancement in technology. The microscope, for example.
Yeah.
The ones being developed in the 19th century, they were offering clearer and clearer glimpses, magnified images of this teeming world of microbes. But the thing is, the significance of what was being seen under those microscopes, it wasn't immediately obvious to everyone.
It's like looking through a window into a hidden universe and not quite knowing how to interpret what you're seeing.
Exactly. And that's where Louis Pasteur and his germ theory come in.
Right at the center of it all.
Absolutely.
And, by 1861, as we see in some of your notes, Pasteur had already laid out some core principles that were, really groundbreaking, really flew in the face of what most people believed at the time.
It's hard for us to imagine now just how radical his ideas were.
I know. Okay, so let's break it down. First, you have the idea that the air around us, the very air we breathe, is filled with these unseen microbes, these germs. And not just that, but the idea that their concentration isn't uniform. That some places are more teeming with these microbes than others.
Right, a completely new way of thinking about the very air we breathe.
And then there's the observation, which seems so simple in hindsight, but it was truly profound at the time, that high temperatures, like boiling, could actually kill these microbes. Think about the implications for sterilization and food preservation. It's huge.
It changed everything.
And then, perhaps the most radical idea of all, the assertion that these microbes, these germs, were the cause of decay, and not the other way around. This was a direct challenge to the long-held belief in spontaneous generation.
Yes, spontaneous generation.
The notion that life could just spontaneously arise from non-living matter.
Like maggots appearing on rotting meat, or mold blossoming on bread seemingly out of nowhere.
Exactly. For centuries, people had simply accepted this idea. It was the prevailing explanation. And then comes Pasteur, and he systematically dismantles this idea with his meticulous experimental design.
Those elegant swan-necked flasks, they're beautifully illustrated in one of the sources you sent in.
I love that image.
So simple, yet so brilliant. He showed that a sterilized broth, sealed inside these flasks with their long, curved necks, would remain sterile indefinitely, because those necks prevented dust and airborne particles from entering. But if you snap the neck off, allowing the contaminated air in, boom, microbial growth, rapidly.
It's such a clear demonstration.
And it led to an undeniable conclusion. Something carried in the air, these microbes were responsible for this rotting, this decay.
Life comes from life, even at the microscopic level.
Exactly.
And Pasteur didn't stop at explaining decay. He went on to connect these germs, as they were increasingly being called, to the very origin of disease.
Right. He didn't just theorize about these germs. He saw their real-world impact.
And your notes mention his publications around 1878, where he really formalized this link between germs and disease.
So in other words.
But even before that, there was his 1870 report on the silkworm epidemic in France.
Ah, yes, the silkworms. That was a crucial moment.
Because it showed that his theories weren't just some abstract scientific debate. They had real-world implications, a direct impact on a major industry, and the livelihoods of countless people.
Absolutely. The French silk industry was being crippled by these mysterious diseases, pébrine and flacherie. And Pasteur, he didn't just sit in his lab theorizing. He went out into the field, rolled up his sleeves, and investigated. He was determined to figure out what was going on.
And he did, right. He identified the microscopic organisms responsible for these diseases.
He did, painstakingly. He identified a microsporidian parasite as the culprit behind pébrine. And while the exact cause of flacherie wasn't pinned down at the time, He strongly suspected bacteria and likely viruses were involved.
And here's the really amazing part. He didn't just identify the cause of cabrine, he also figured out that it was hereditary.
Right. He traced how the disease was passed down from parent moths to their offspring.
And he developed a practical method for preventing its spread.
By carefully examining crushed moths for the telltale corpuscles of the parasite before allowing them to breed.
It's incredible. He saved a whole industry.
And provided powerful real-world evidence for the validity and the utility of his germ theory.
A truly remarkable achievement. Now, before we go any further, I just want to take a moment to acknowledge the incredible power of shared knowledge and the thrill of intellectual discovery. Here at the All Sorts podcast, we're constantly diving deep into these captivating topics.
That's what we do.
And it's all fueled by your curiosity, by the fascinating material that you bring to us. And honestly, if you're finding this exploration as illuminating as we are, I can only encourage you to imagine the universe of other fascinating conversations that are out there just waiting to be had. So if you're enjoying this, head over to our YouTube channel. You can find us by searching for All Sorts Podcast. Hit that subscribe button. You'll become part of a community of curious minds from all walks of life. And while you're there, take a look at our back catalog. We've got a rich archive of past deep dives, each one a unique journey into the realms of science, history, culture, you name it. And for even more insights, for those behind-the-scenes glimpses, and just to connect with us and other listeners, follow All Sorts Podcast on X, Instagram, and Threads. Every like, every share, every comment helps us to keep this quest for understanding going. So, okay, we've got Pasteur with these truly revolutionary ideas about germs causing disease. But now the question is, how did those ideas make their way across the channel to Britain? Were they immediately embraced?
No, not quite. As some of your sources detail, the British medical establishment, they weren't exactly quick to embrace Pasteur's germ theory. Even after his initial publications in 1861, there's a lot of resistance.
Resistance to change.
To change, and also, the theory of spontaneous generation, it still had a very strong hold on people's thinking.
It's hard to let go of an idea that's been around for centuries.
Absolutely. And it's also important to remember the context here. At this stage, Pasteur had convincingly linked microbes to decay, and even to some animal diseases, but he hadn't yet identified the specific bacteria responsible for many human illnesses.
That's more of a general principle at that point.
Exactly. And that lack of specific identification, it made it harder for some people to completely abandon the more established theories, even if those theories were ultimately incorrect.
It's like trying to assemble a puzzle without all the pieces.
It was a paradigm shift, and those rarely happen overnight.
So who are the key figures in Britain who started to bridge this gap? Who really took Pasteur's work and said, wait a minute, this has huge implications for how we practice medicine?
Two individuals really stand out. First, you have Joseph Lister.
A surgeon.
Exactly. And your notes rightly highlight his crucial work in connecting Pasteur's germ theory directly to the problem of post-operative infection. Lister saw firsthand the devastating frequency of infections following surgery. Even relatively simple procedures often led to these terrible infections, and many patients didn't survive.
It's hard to imagine how terrifying surgery must have been back then.
Absolutely. So, Lister, he reasoned that if microbes in the air could cause food to spoil, as Pasteur had so clearly demonstrated, then perhaps those same unseen agents were also responsible for the infections plaguing surgical wards.
It's a logical leap, but a huge one.
It was. But even then, it wasn't a simple matter of just reading Pasteur's work and immediately applying it to surgery. As your notes mention, Lister faced significant challenges in actually proving his ideas.
Because even with the advances in microscopes, actually identifying the specific bacteria causing an infection, that was still a real challenge, right?
Oh, a huge challenge. Imagine trying to distinguish between the bacteria causing a specific infection and all the other microbes present in the environment or on a patient's body. The tools to definitively identify and track specific pathogens, they were still quite rudimentary.
So he was working a bit in the dark.
In a way, yes. He had to develop antiseptic techniques, like using carbolic acid, to combat these unseen enemies, even without always having clear scientific proof of exactly which microbe he was targeting. It was a case of practical application leading the way, even before the full scientific understanding had caught up.
A real pioneer. And then you mentioned John Tyndall. What was his role in this whole story?
Tyndall, he was fascinating. A physicist by training, not a medical doctor, and his work provided crucial physical evidence supporting the idea that these germs were carried in airborne particles.
So he was looking at it from a different angle.
Exactly. And here's where it gets interesting. Because Tyndall wasn't part of the medical establishment, many doctors in Britain were initially hesitant to take his suggestions seriously. There was a certain amount of professional skepticism toward an outsider, even one providing compelling scientific evidence coming into their domain.
It really highlights how scientific progress isn't always a straight line. Social structures and professional boundaries can have a huge impact.
Absolutely.
Now, it sounds like Pasteur's own body of work, beyond his initial articulation of germ theory, really laid the groundwork for what people like Lister and Tyndall were able to do.
Oh, without a doubt. His contributions were immense.
So let's delve into some of his key experiments and discoveries. Your notes mention his early work on fermentation in Lille.
Ah, yes, the Lille period, a really pivotal moment in his scientific journey. You see, a local brewer approached Pasteur with a problem. His beer was going sour.
Not ideal.
Not at all. And this seemingly mundane issue sparked a series of investigations by Pasteur into the process of fermentation. He didn't just confirm Theodor Schwann's earlier suggestion that yeast were living organisms responsible for converting sugar into alcohol. He went much further.
So he was building on existing knowledge.
He was. He demonstrated that different types of microorganisms could contaminate the fermentation process, leading to these unwanted byproducts, like lactic acid, which was causing the beer and wine to sour.
So it wasn't just the presence of yeast, but also the presence of these other microbes that was affecting the taste.
Exactly. And this was a crucial step in understanding that specific microbes had specific effects.
A foundational principle.
Absolutely. And it led directly to the development of pasteurization.
The process of heating liquids to a specific temperature to kill off those unwanted bacteria and prevent spoilage.
Precisely. Pasteur meticulously developed this technique initially to combat the diseases of wine, as he called them. He even secured a patent for the process in 1865.
So he saw the commercial potential as well.
Oh, absolutely. And together with Claude Bernard, he even conducted experiments applying this heating method to blood and urine as early as 1862.
Wow, so he was already thinking about the potential medical applications.
He was. And soon, pasteurization was being used for other beverages, like beer and milk, revolutionizing food and drink preservation. And this had a huge impact on public health even before the full understanding of disease transmission was widely accepted.
So it was a practical solution that preceded the full theoretical understanding.
Exactly.
It's quite a leap, though, isn't it? Going from understanding why beer spoils to the idea that microorganisms could invade animals and humans and cause disease.
It is a significant leap, but a logical one. The realization that specific microorganisms were responsible for the diseases of beverages, well, it naturally led to the hypothesis that similar unseen organisms could also invade living creatures and disrupt their normal functioning, leading to illness.
Like a microscopic invasion.
Exactly. And this analogy, this idea, it heavily influenced Joseph Lister's thinking. It motivated him to adopt antiseptic practices in surgery, aiming to prevent these airborne microbes from entering surgical wounds. And Pasteur's subsequent publications, like Études sur le vin in 1866 and Études sur la bière in 1876, they further solidified his understanding of the specific roles of different microorganisms in causing these diseases. And this, of course, strengthened the parallel to diseases in living organisms.
So it's a case of understanding a fundamental biological process and then applying that understanding to a wider range of phenomena.
Precisely.
Now, we touched on his groundbreaking work with silkworms earlier. That sounds like that was a pivotal moment in demonstrating the practical power of his theories.
It absolutely was. As your sources so vividly describe, from 1865 to 1870, Pasteur dedicated himself to unraveling the mysteries of the pébrine and flasherie diseases that were devastating the French silk industry. Now, initially, even Pasteur himself had some doubts. He even briefly aligned with some of his contemporaries, like Antoine Béchamp, who questioned the microbial origin of pébrine.
So even he wasn't entirely convinced at first.
No, he was a true scientist. He followed the evidence, but through rigorous investigation, he definitively identified those microscopic corpuscles as the causative agent of pébrine. And he implicated bacteria, likely including viruses, in flasherie. And his development of that practical method for preventing pébrine, it was a major triumph. It saved a vital industry, and it provided compelling real-world evidence for the validity and the utility of his germ story.
A turning point.
Absolutely.
Beyond these very specific and impactful applications, Pasteur also made some truly fundamental scientific contributions that helped build a broader acceptance for germ theory within the scientific community.
Oh, his scientific achievements went far beyond just the germ theory. They were immense.
Like his experiments disproving spontaneous generation using those swan neck flasks.
Those were elegant experiments, and they challenged a centuries-old dogma about the very nature of life. And his work was recognized. He received the prestigious Alhumbert Prize in 1862 for this groundbreaking research, which lent significant credibility to his scientific approach.
And his scientific curiosity, it wasn't limited to the microbial world, was it?
No, not at all. His early career work on molecular asymmetry, that was incredibly insightful.
Tell me more about that.
Well, through his investigations into tartaric acid crystals, he discovered molecular asymmetry, or chirality. He found that molecules could exist as mirror images of each other, with distinct properties.
Mirror images that were chemically different.
Exactly. And this was a foundational discovery in the field of stereochemistry, with huge implications for both structural chemistry and the development of pharmaceuticals. It showcased his brilliance in tackling fundamental scientific questions across different scales.
And then, of course, there's his research on fermentation, which established the understanding of the role of living organisms in what were previously thought to be purely chemical processes.
A crucial contribution. He meticulously demonstrated that fermentation wasn't simply decomposition, as proposed by prominent chemists like Berzelius and Liebig. It was driven by the activity of living microorganisms, specifically yeast converting sugar into alcohol. He also identified the different microorganisms responsible for producing lactic acid, which was causing the spoilage of wine.
And the Pasteur effect.
Ah, yes. His observation that fermentation rates were lower in the presence of oxygen. This detailed understanding of microbial metabolism laid the foundation for his later work on disease.
And then, of course, there's his work on immunology and vaccination.
Truly groundbreaking work that transformed preventative medicine.
Absolutely. Let's start with the accidental discovery of the chicken cholera vaccine in 1879.
That was a stroke of luck, but Pasteur was brilliant at recognizing the significance of these unexpected findings. He was using old cultures of the bacteria, cultures that had lost their virulence, and he found that injecting these weakened bacteria into chickens actually conferred immunity.
A weakened form of the disease protected against the full-blown version.
Precisely. He presented this to the French Academy of Sciences in 1880, theorizing that exposure to oxygen played a role in this weakening process, which he termed attenuation.
And then came the development of the anthrax vaccine, a huge step forward given the widespread devastation this disease was causing in livestock.
It was a significant undertaking. You know, his investigations even involved observations about earthworms potentially bringing anthrax spores to the surface.
Interesting.
It was. And then there was his famous public demonstration at Pouilly-le-Fort in May 1881, where he vaccinated animals and then exposed them to lethal doses of anthrax.
A bold move.
It was. But the vaccinated animals survived, while the unvaccinated ones died. It was a dramatic and highly publicized success. And importantly, Pasteur deliberately used the term vaccines in honor of Edward Jenner's earlier work with smallpox.
A nice tribute.
It was. And it's worth mentioning that this period also saw the emergence of a scientific rivalry between Pasteur and Robert Koch, both of whom made significant contributions to understanding anthrax.
Competition can often drive innovation.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, the rabies vaccine. Perhaps his most iconic achievement.
A truly remarkable achievement, especially considering how terrifying rabies is. He developed the vaccine by growing the virus in rabbits and then weakening it by drying the infected nerve tissue. And then, the first successful human trial on young Joseph Meister in 1885, a boy who had been severely bitten by a rabid dog, a watershed moment.
And a risky one for Pasteur, wasn't it? I mean, he wasn't a licensed medical practitioner.
No, that's right. He was taking a big risk. But the success of the rabies vaccine, it was undeniable. It led to the establishment of Pasteur Institutes all over the world, dedicated to research and treatment. A lasting legacy.
And your sources also credit him with advocating for hand sanitization by doctors before surgery.
That's right. Even while acknowledging the pioneering work of Semmelweis and Lister in promoting hygiene, Pasteur's germ theory provided a solid theoretical basis for the importance of hygiene in preventing infection. It was the why behind the what that Semmelweis and Lister had already observed.
And this is where it gets a bit complicated, right? Because no scientific career of this magnitude is without its complexities and controversies.
That's right.
And your notes do touch on some of the debates and reassessments surrounding Pasteur's work.
It's important to acknowledge those for a balanced understanding. Re-examinations of his laboratory notebooks have suggested that he may have selectively presented his findings, perhaps even downplayed the contributions of his rivals in order to strengthen his own claims.
That's a serious accusation.
It is. There was the long-standing dispute with Antoine Béchamp over the nature of fermentation and the priority of discovery, and then the debates surrounding the development of the anthrax vaccine and the contributions of Toussaint.
It's a reminder that science is a human endeavor with all its complexities and imperfections.
It is. But even with those controversies, it doesn't negate the profound and transformative impact of Pasteur's discoveries, the undeniable brilliance of his scientific mind.
So, looking back, what was the ultimate impact of Pasteur's germ theory on 19th century British medicine?
It was a revolution. It provided the crucial scientific framework that allowed British medicine to finally move away from the miasma theory, the idea that diseases were caused by bad air, and embrace the understanding that diseases have microbial origins.
A fundamental shift in thinking.
It was, and it had a cascading effect. It validated Lister's antiseptic surgical techniques, led to a greater emphasis on hygiene in all aspects of medical practice and public health, and paved the way for the development of preventative medicines through vaccination.
It's hard to overstate how important that was.
The acceptance of germ theory was a watershed moment that fundamentally reshaped how disease was understood, treated, and prevented, not just in Britain, but across the globe.
It's incredible to think about how one person's ideas can have such a profound impact on the world.
It is, and it makes you wonder what seemingly outlandish scientific concepts in our own time are on the verge of transforming our understanding and practices in ways we can't yet fully grasp.
That's a great question, and a perfect note to end on. The quest for knowledge is a never-ending deep dive, and your participation is what fuels our journey here at the All Sorts Podcast. So if you enjoyed this exploration into the past, into the world of Louis Pasteur and the germ theory, please consider joining our community of curious minds. Like, share, and subscribe to the All Sorts Podcast on YouTube. Your support helps us to bring more of these fascinating stories to light. And don't forget to explore our extensive back catalog. We've got a treasure trove of past deep dives, each one a unique adventure and learning. And for more insights and just to connect with us and other listeners, follow All Sorts Podcast on X, Instagram, and Threads. Until our next exploration, keep questioning, keep learning, and keep diving deep with the All Sorts Podcast.